Mom is not computer literate. She is not on the internet. She insists on sending me these little handwritten notes on frilly stationery every couple of weeks, telling me what she's doing, and it usually concludes with something like, "Why haven't you written?" But about 2 years ago, Mom started sending me all these news clippings. And every time I'd open up her nice little envelopes, out would fall all these clippings from her daily newspaper. And they were all stories about farmers markets that were opening up in her community, new gardens or community garden programs, some local food initiative, some gathering or workshop about farming or food. And so I'm talking to her on the phone one day. I say, "Mom, what's going on? I'm getting all these news clippings from you. I mean, what's happening?" And she said, "You know, Mark, for the first time in my life, I actually understand what it is you do for a living." So I said, "Thanks, Mom. I'm glad you finally got it after all these years." So I'll actually echo something that Kurt Vonnegut once said. "Take it from someone who's been around 1,000 years, food is pretty much the whole story all the time." And if it's a big story and a big deal to all of us, you know it's a really big deal to those who make big money from it. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about tonight. Talking about the local food system, how it's growing, how we're all becoming more excited about that, how we're more interested in making sure that everybody, regardless of income or race or location, is also getting the benefits from this good local food. But I'm also going to talk about what I would call the dark side of the food system, what I feel are the threats to the growth in the kind of food that we want, kind that's supporting healthy eating, supporting local farms, and a quality of life that we're beginning to reconnect with. Now, let me give you a little illustration right away when I talk about what I mean by the dark side. I reach into my little bag, I pull out my little prop, and you can look at it, you can see what it is. Can you tell me what it is? Chapstick. It's just a little tube of chapstick. Yolanda, can you catch? Now read what it says on there. Say it loud. It says Monsanto is what is emblazoned on the side of this. The nation's largest manufacturer, developer of genetically modified seed, genetically modified organisms. This chapstick is not genetically modified. I can assure you. It will not hurt you. You do not need to evacuate the premises. It is fine. It's just a tube of chapstick. But Monsanto decided to put their name on it because they did put this chapstick into this bag, which is actually remains of a backpack. And inside this backpack were a number of other kind of tchotchkes and mementos and little things from a host of very large agro-industrial food corporations, Archer Daniel Midlands, ConAgra, the Syngenta, kind of a who's who of the industrial food system. And it included a lot of pamphlets and reports and what I would really call propaganda. And the thing was stuffed with that kind of material, including this chapstick. And what it says on this bag is the Legislative Agriculture Chairs Summit. And this was a summit that was held in Arizona at a very plush resort last January. And the legislative ag chairs are those people that run the legislative committees in all 50 states, which is devoted to agriculture, also often to food. And these are the folks that really direct the policy-making process when it comes to food and food systems and agriculture in each state. They effectively are probably the most important and powerful politicians, state by state. And they were all brought together, along with their spouses, at no cost to anyone other than Monsanto, ConAgra, ADM, etc., etc. In other words, the people with the most wealth, the people who are making the most money from our food, and in fact, who have been directing the evolution of our food system, were the people who brought these folks together. And they obviously used this time together to try to influence them so that when bills came before them that were either in their interests or not in their interests, those legislative chairs would act accordingly. To me, this represents a really serious threat to our democracy. Who is going to make the decisions about our food system? Will it be you, the consumer, you, the citizen, or will it be a relatively small number of corporations who have the capacity and the opportunity to essentially control, or certainly to have an undue influence on the people that make these decisions? Now, I know that many of us are sort of maybe might be surprised by this because you know how much the food system, the kind of alternative food system, this organic and sustainable food system is growing, and it is growing a lot. Today, there are over 7,100 farmers markets in the United States, according to the USDA. 6,200 farmers markets last year. So there was almost a 20% growth rate in farmers markets in 1 year. What other aspect of the economy can you say there's been a 20% growth rate? Farmers markets, other than maybe home foreclosures. But in 1994, 18 years ago, there were only 1,700 farmers markets. That just shows you what's been going on since farmers markets clearly are emblematic, I think, of this interest in local food. And I'm sure Pennsylvania probably has their farmers markets must number in the hundreds by now. I can remember back working with people here when there weren't more than perhaps a dozen or so. Local food is actually the value of what we consider local food is estimated to be in the range of $5 to $7 billion per year. That's not bad. The organic food industry is somewhere in the range of $25 billion a year and is the fastest growing segment of the retail food industry. Aided in part by public policy over the last few years, we're seeing an unprecedented expansion in farm-to-school programs. There's now over 12,000 public schools in America that are buying food directly from farmers. You know, going back not too many years, there were hardly any at all. At the same time, we're seeing more public sector procurement regulations being changed to encourage the purchase of locally produced food. Sometimes it's very difficult to get the kind of local, your public institutions to be able to, is that? Is that a Monsanto thing or something? Anyway, so I'll ignore that. So these regulations are really what guide a lot of the food purchasing that goes on in public institutions, and they're now changing to favor, actually encourage the purchasing or the sourcing of locally produced food. We're seeing changes in land use regulations from suburban yards to counties to states to favor food production. We're no longer, we're actually encouraging people to move away from the sort of pristine, immaculately conceived suburban lawn to yards that actually can grow food and maybe raise poultry and bees, which they're doing in many places now. The public and private sectors are finally investing in food retail ventures to restore the food deserts that were created by the abandonment of inner city America by the supermarket industry. And since moving to New Mexico, I also saw what the abandonment of rural America looks like by the supermarket industry. And as you may know, Pennsylvania is the leading model for restoring abandoned communities. Pennsylvania's Fresh Food Financing Initiative, I understand my most recent numbers, has been able to bring over 80 new supermarkets throughout the state, both rural and urban, and along with it about 5,000 jobs. It shows you the power of food as an economic engine, that it can actually, simply by selling groceries, you can actually create 5,000 jobs. There's over 150 local and state food policy councils across the country that are promoting just and sustainable food policies. And by just, I want to just make sure we're all on the same page. I'm talking about making sure that everybody has access to good, healthy food, regardless of your income, regardless of where you live. To me, that's a justice issue, a social justice issue. And in Adams County, I had the privilege of working with people there to assist in the development of the Adams County Food Policy Council. I believe that Pittsburgh has recently established a food policy council. Dietary regulations are another aspect of the change that's taking place in our food system. They're actually giving consumers information about with which they can make decisions about the food they buy, such as calorie counts, so that we actually know how many calories are in a Big Mac. That helps us to make a decision about whether or not to eat that thing or not. But as much as we need to celebrate these victories, and we do have a lot of them, we have to also acknowledge that there are shortcomings. The notion that a food revolution is underway is, in my opinion, a bit premature. It may, in fact, distract us from some of the real challenges that we face. For instance, only about 4% of the retail food business out of that 25 billion, that only represents 4% of our total retail food dollar in this country. Fast food, all those places that I saw coming in here right off the highway, that's a $170 billion industry. But more importantly, it possesses enough marketing muscle to brand children before they can walk. According to the Yale University's Rudd Center, the food industry is spending $4.2 billion a year to market food to our children. They're effectively branding them. I want you to be a Pepsi kid, or I want you to be a Coke kid. I want you to be a McDonald's kid, or I want you to be a Burger King kid. I want them to leave my kids alone myself. Overweight and obesity affects 65% of us, with the poor and communities of color disproportionately represented in those numbers. The Center for Disease Control has said that up to 1/3 of US adults could have diabetes by the year 2050 unless Americans change their eating and physical activity behaviors. In spite of good faith efforts by many farmers markets and food stamp programs and other ways to connect lower income people to good healthy food, we still have a long way to go. Much of that food, often because of where it's located and because of price, is still out of the reach of many low income folks. And we have 50 million Americans now that are hungry or food insecure, according to the US Department of Agriculture, more than we've ever had before. 46 million people are now on the food stamp program. That's now called SNAP. That itself is also a record. And the number of food banks has gone from 0 in the 1970s, when I was just starting out in my work as a community food activist, to 206 today. And which represents kind of collectively under the wing of those food banks, you might say, over 60,000 emergency feeding outlets. When I was starting out in the late 1970s, we only had, probably across the entire country, maybe a couple of thousand such emergency food outlets. And these were the traditional old line